Hi everyone, welcome to the Befores and Afters podcast. I'm Ian Fales from Befores and Afters. Last year, a demo popped up on the internet showing Tom Hanks delivering an emotional scene from Forrest Gump, but in Japanese. Was it a dubbed voiceover? No, it was a demo of TrueSync, an AI tool from Flawless designed to create lip-synced visualizations in multiple languages. Flawless was in the news again recently when a film called Fall, about two climbers who scale a 2,000-foot radio tower, needed some F words in the film replaced. TrueSync was used here again to turn some of those F-bombs into words like frick or freakin'. On the podcast today, I talked to the director of Fall, Scott Mann, who also happens to be the co-CEO and founder of Flawless. We take a look at TrueSync and how it came to be. Let's jump into the chat now. Hi Scott, how's things?
Good, thank you. Very good. How are you?
Good, thank you so much for joining me from London, where I think you've just been busy promoting the film, right?
Yeah, no, we just had I was just over here. We had the European premiere in Leicester Square, so that was very exciting, and it was on a exceptionally large IMAX screen that I had my nose up against and saw the film from a very different perspective, just a little bit too close. So yeah, it was good. It was fun, though.
Oh, right. Well, um, I'm really curious about this film in two different ways. One is how you even made it, but also it's been getting a lot of attention because of how used Flawless. I want to ask you
Yeah.
about the history of Flawless a little bit in a second, but just so our listeners know exactly what I mean by Flawless, can you talk about how that was used in the film, just to get a really upfront feel of the basically lip replacement, mouth replacement,
Yeah.
word changes?
Yeah. So basically, the film, the context, I guess, was that we had I'd done the film, and it was an independent film. So that meant that you're showing it to distributors for selling it, very often after the film is complete. And we'd gotten a cut of the film, and we showed it to Lionsgate, a US distributor, and they came back loving the movie and were very excited about the movie, but pointed out that the thing they're excited about and the reason why they would give it a wide theatrical release would be because of the experience that the film was, because it was made to be very experiential and very kind of almost like a theme park ride type
Mm.
affair. But the negative they had was that the problem is there are so many swear words in the movie, so many f bombs that it would be an R, and they wouldn't release it wide as an R because it's a different type of movie and it fills a different kind of spot. So they asked me if I could cut out all the swearing. We actually went to the MPA, the Motion Picture Association, to check that, and they did come back saying yes, it's restricted because you've got about 36 f bombs in there,
Right.
and you're only allowed two if you want to get a PG-13, which is very restricted.
Yeah.
And the film itself is arguably a bit trickier than a normal film, maybe, to cut out f bombs or cut around it, because there's only two characters and they're stuck in the middle of basically 2,000 foot up in the middle of the desert, and there's just two of them, and with nothing to cut away to for the duration of the movie. So I looked at it and I thought, well, it's going to ruin the movie if I cut the language out. And I try any normal approach. What we really should be doing is reshooting the scenes in the film to not have the offending language in, if we want to retain the quality of the film, which myself and the producers were very adamant that we didn't want it to harm the movie. And then, but as the offered alternative, I happened to be involved with a film VFX company called Flawless, which I'd founded several years ago, and we were actually in the process of a new technology that was allowing us to do. Principally, we're working on translating movies from one language to another, like
Mm.
authentically, and using some new technologies that enabled very like hyper photorealistic human renderings, where essentially you could change the lip synchronicity of faces and kind of do things like this for foreign language films. And someone has suggested that maybe we can do this as a solution here. So rather than having to reshoot the scenes with alternative lines, we could use the flawless method and replace them that way. And so that's kind of how it all came about. And on a practical level, it meant I could then not have to go back up a mountain and up a 2,000-foot tower to reshoot anything. I could go to a studio with the actors and the writer actually, and record these new lines, and then using that, we were able to essentially put it through the system and have it so the film image itself is altered so that it looks like they performed those lines on set. So it's kind of like a digital reshoot of sorts.
And just to be clear to the audience, it also meant you didn't have to do any kind of extensive 2D or 3D manipulation of their mouths, which I'm not sure
That's
was
right.
necessarily done a lot in the past anyway, but that would be an
Yeah.
expensive process, right?
Well, like this ties a little bit actually into the
Mm.
history of
Mm.
Flawless, really, because where I came from Flawless with was I as a filmmaker, I've used a lot of VFX in the past, and I've kind of grown up, I guess, with VFX, storytelling VFX mainly, though, in terms of,
Mm.
let's say two actors are, from two different takes, and I'll do a split screen so they're in the same take, to various different things, all the way up to I had a movie where I had to do full on like head replacement. And I got to work with some of the kind of I would say like the best in the industry that would typically do human VFX, human CGI
Mm.
when it's needed. And what I found there was no matter how good it got, it always looked in that uncanny valley feel. And it was very like the old systems of the Hollywood or filmmaking, let's say, VFX pipelines and the way they were working to kind of essentially recreate, re-render, and try and create the same environments, the same layers, and all the things that required. It never looked quite right. And I think with human faces, we as audience members and filmmakers, we spend, in my case, 42 years staring at faces, and we're very expert at the subtle nuances that tell us whether a human is emoting and expressing for real or not. So I think it's kind of the hardest problem for VFX to solve. It always kind of has been, and I think and so I tested a number of those systems, and I tried lots of different ways to solve this kind of problem. And it was only when I came across a science white paper that was written back. I came across it 2018. It was written by Jung and Kim, Pablo Garrido, and it was headed up by a professor called Christian Theobald. And they were exploring this new area of science, which essentially allowed like unbelievably good human renderings and human adjustment for film imagery. And that's what started my kind of flawless intrigue and adventure in a way, because it ended up that I founded the company and with those guys, and we worked on this new technology, and then kind of went through a whole process to build that into a tech company.
There's obviously been a lot of discussion and demos around about deep fakes, deep learning,
Mhm.
machine learning, and AI. Does your system, which I believe is called TrueSync, I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, is it capitalizing on that approach? Is it taking it further? What can you tell us about how the actual tech works?
Yeah, I think deepfake's very different, and but I think there are kind of like it becomes a kind of complex subject in a sense. Like deepfake, in a lot of ways, is kind of is often a bad thing, right? It's used nefariously, too
Yeah.
often used nefariously, um, illegally, unethically. All these things that it's been kind of exploited for, unfortunately. And I think that there's a lot of things wrong there and I think that the technology that we do at Flawless is exceptionally different than from a technological point of view. But I see why, with deepfake, where you're kind of essentially replacing a face identity of someone, right? And making kind of, say, a Tom Cruise impersonator look exactly like Tom Cruise, or those kind of things.
Mm.
It is an interesting demonstration of a neural network rendering, deep learning technology. So I see why people often will regard, like I saw a lot of headlines on Fall actually, where it was regarding as deep fake tech as being the kind of coined term.
Mm.
Um, but it's so different than deep fake in so many different ways, and it's kind of like I would say that deepfake is incredibly uh, simple. It's like a layer of one of the elements of science that's in use. What we do at Flawless is incredibly more complicated and advanced than deepfake, and I think but yeah, I see why as it kind of falls in the bracket of that next generation of renderings and things, why it often gets kind of mixed up in that.
Mm.
But yeah, but there's also a kind of also a big, ethically there's a big point really where I think my experience in the film industry, and anyone who's in it will understand kind of the level of I guess as an industry, in terms of artists and talent and things like this, it's very important that the kind of the trust and securities are there in when you're working with people. And I think there's a lot that has to be said about that. And I think that really we've kind of set up Flawless from get-go to empower filmmakers and make it filmmaking tools like by filmmakers for filmmakers that fits into that industry. And that means doing everything very kind of ethically with a sign off of all the participants for the right reasons, and doing it all in the right way, which is it's a very different approach. And it's and really, it's as important as the technology is how it's used, and that it isn't misused.
Just on this film, where you had to replace some F bombs, and I think you put in different words
Mm.
like freaking instead.
Yeah.
Can you just
Yeah.
talk a little bit about what you actually did to perhaps bring the cast back for rereading and reshooting of any of those lines? I
Yeah.
mean,
Well,
was
well, not reshooting, but we did, yeah. In terms of rereading it, it was
yes.
much like uh it was like so typically with, if I'm sure you know this, right, in the finishing process of a film, typically you have a process called ADR,
Mm.
where you'll replace lines of the movie in a sound recording studio, and the actors come in and I'll direct them to perform those lines. And very often, like, the workaround in the film editing process is when you kind of cut to the back of someone's head, and a line of importance is inserted into that particular shot, so you get away with a lack of lip sync. And it's a very common thing that kind of, when you notice it, it really stands out at times, right? That the major plot points are often revealed at the back of a character's head.
Yeah.
And the problem being obviously that it doesn't link up with lip synchronicity. So what we did with this is we did the same kind of audio recording process. So we brought Ginny and Grace, had them come into the audio recording studio again, and but this time we were essentially like putting down the dialogue against the faces and making sure that and it was obviously out of sync at that point because we were just laying down the dialogue that we we're going to use to replace it. But you want to keep the same kind of tone and tenor and all the things that are in the human audio performance, make sure that they're all intact and they blend in perfectly. And then it was taking that audio into the Flawless system, which uses audio as an input to adjust the video images. So that was kind of how we sourced out the performances, and then the visual process on the Flawless side. There's quite a few layers to it, but essentially it learns all multiple layers of kind of parameters by watching the original performance of the actors, the visual and audio performance of the actors, to learn all the nuances of the visemes and phonemes, how they speak, how they express, and all these different things, and different intrinsic camera data and things like this. And we were able to put the audio essentially through that to make the facial adjustments so that they matched the new dialogue. Principally, um, uh, it's a three-dimensional model that is kind of created through our process, and it's a lot,
Mm.
and it's more than just like a lot of these models that you see will use a two-dimensional image-to-image approach or image two-dimensional based modeling, and it becomes we end up dealing with three-dimensional space entirely. So yes, so there's different processes that create that.
Interesting. You set up the front that, originally you'd sort of got into Flawless to do, I guess, translation, for international releases.
Yeah.
Tell me about, that original idea, and then, whether you have actually had a chance even to do anything in that regard.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like that's where it all started actually.
Mm,
I'd done a film. I did a film called it was released as Heist in the UK, and it had Jeffrey D. Morgan and Robert De Niro,
mm,
Dave Bautista in it. And it was actually working with De Niro, um who's incredible as an actor, right? And very all about the character and everything that feeds into the story of the character in a sense. And what I found on kind of set was we would take so much care with the wording of the dialogue, of how the dialogue was written, of how it was performed. Exactly, it was so nuanced and delicate that it kind of taught me as a filmmaker at the time, thinking the importance of those nuances is everything. Because if the moment isn't working in a certain way, the scene doesn't necessarily work, and then the whole film doesn't work. So it's this kind of tapestry balance of understanding how kind of fragile these things are, especially when you've got kind of an ensemble of incredible actors who are all kind of reacting and interacting with each other. And I finished that movie and I was very happy with it. But then I actually saw a foreign translation of the movie, and I noticed that the dialogue, even the dialogue that was being spoken was different. It had been rewritten for the foreign version, and it was performed massively differently. And I saw like Robert De Niro kind of in this big, loud, kind of elaborate way. And because I knew it was my film and I knew it was absolutely wrong, and I was kind of flabbergasted and devastated that it was so kind of damaged through the current process of dubbing. And I think a lot of filmmakers, a lot of people, I think, are not really aware of that because they never watch the foreign versions, and we have no kind of non-global, like no global perspective in a sense. So it was after seeing that I actually went on the kind of journey to try and figure a way out to fix it, because my feeling was that the kind of the way I looked at it is the audience is so reduced on foreign content as we regard it, right? For anything that's non-home language, we call foreign, right? So for that, the audience was so kind of reduced. And it makes sense. Like, in America, there's barely anyone watching all the incredible content from around the world, all the
yeah.
great films made in every other country of a different language. They're not even shown here. They're literally, from a sales point of view, when people kind of buy and sell films, that they're literally worthless. And I think we did like research on this with Flawless at one point, and it all averaged out that like international territories work out to give like less than 5% of the home territory value in terms of like when a film is kind of sold, and that's all based on audience numbers. And it kind of bridged that line across all that information that of course that's the case, because it's a kind of shitty output, right? It's a terrible output when it's damaged that way and when it's done badly. And then that's not even considering the fact that the immersion isn't there, which is really the heart, I would say, of like cinema in a way, like the blending of audio and visuals combining to bring something to life. That's completely out the window, right? Because you don't
Mm,
have that in traditional dubbing techniques and so kind of the old process that's been going on for like almost 100 years of basically kind of damaging the audio to try and fit some of the video to try and retain it is just such a kind of backwards way of doing it that's what pushed me into exploring it. And yeah, and I tried everything in the traditional VFX sense, like say including the kind of full proper head scan, the very expensive head scans, to try and do this. And it was always falling in the kind of in the uncanny valley. Kind of, it wasn't holding up, and it wasn't practical either, because it was so manual and so
mm.
kind of resource heavy that I remember I did one shot for something where I had to try and change a line, and it was like in the old method, like this one shot, I'm sure it cost us like, I don't know, 100, to do the full face scan with the actor. And then the show itself cost us like £70,000 or something. And it was
Yeah.
4 seconds long. And it was like, how is this gonna work? It's never gonna work for movies. So really that's why like AI, the AI techniques that enable kind of, photoreal human renderings, and actually, not just the rendering of a still, it's the motion of expression as well, is really a big part of it, and actual nuanced expression, individual style expression of different actors playing different parts is also a big component. So there was a lot of those things that really kind of came about to offer a solution to the problem. And then the other side of it is the build out of the automation of that, so that it's done at a level where the scale kind of matches up with the need. So yeah. But to get back to your original point, the first thing I did, the first test scene that I ever did, using what is now a very kind of crude version of the system, but it was the system that we originally patented, was with De Niro doing a scene that I knew how it should have been done in a certain language. So I was able to direct a voice actor to do the correct words whilst forgetting, like, don't look at the mouth. I had to cover up the mouth so he wasn't trying to fit the mouth movements. Um, and yeah, and it was a guy called Christian Bruckner. He was out of Germany, and he's actually the voice of De Niro in Germany. And
Right.
he did this first kind of experiment, so to speak, and that was the first time we did this, where we got a great recording of the performance for the scene, and then we used the technology to essentially, yeah, retime and resync it so it fitted in sync, but still had the kind of emotion, immersion, and everything that the scene required. So that was the first time we ever did it.
Oh wow, that's really cool. Scott, maybe to finish up, I was very curious about people's reactions to what you did on Four, including the
Yeah,
cast members themselves. When you started showing people maybe works in progress or even the final, lip sync changes,
yeah.
what do you remember people would say about it? And I mean, I know it's
I,
your tool and
no,
it's your film, but what did
Yeah, I
they
know.
sort of,
Yeah,
how
exactly.
did they react?
They're always going to be nice to me about it in person, but no, no. I think in terms of like say Ginny and Chris, they were like, uh, they just couldn't tell what and when we'd done. Like there's certain key ones. I think anyone watching the film, when there's a big close up of someone saying "frick" instead of instead of fuck, it's probably pretty obvious that that's been replaced. But there are a number of other lines that kind of, because you can't just swap out lines like that, because then it becomes kind of naff. So I think when they watched it, like, I I would say you can't tell. Like, and I said this to people before, like, just try and find what we did, and I don't think you can, because and even when I'm looking for it now, I can't really tell, because it's I think, yeah, it's kind of, it fits right in. It's very hard. Like, I know the moments, and there's always like little edge moments for me as a director, where, even on in every film that I finished ever, I'm always looking and going, "Mate, is that quite right?" Or is but I found that it was interesting that I think people think they might be able to tell. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that like the news that I saw about it, people were like, "Oh, said, oh, it's spot." Like, there was kind of like, is there an uproar about, like, if it's spoiling the film by taking out the fucks? But I don't think it does at all, and I think it does kind of what was essentially the original intent. It allows it to be opened up to a wider audience, and for me, on a personal level, like, it allowed me to take my kids for the first time ever to see one of my movies. And I was really happy that I was able to traumatize them with this heights horror, because it only had two fucks in. So yeah, so things like that you can't tell. And the actors reaction really, and a lot of the actors that kind of seen the stuff, it's always been, it's really just been like, wow, oh my God. Because it's like, it is them saying it, really. It's kind of taking their phonemes, like the way they speak, and it's kind of retiming it, like re-editing it, so to speak. So it's not like I've seen other things. And again, like, I've seen other things in different places, but where I think things like this go wrong is when you're kind of like puppeteering, or you're doing anything
Hmm.
that actually is hands on to a performance, is bad, because the performers and the actors should own the performance. And I think that as a creative, as a director, there's an element of like you edit different things anyway, and you're always kind of refining something to make it work. And that's kind of part of a director's responsibility as the custodian of a movie or a television or whatnot. But I don't think we want to get into the situation where the dynamics are wrong, right? Like the performance should be owned by the performer, and it should be, ultimately, the custodian of that is the director. And I think those things need to be held onto very carefully. And I think, but I think, yeah, from an actor's point of view, I see a lot that um, I think especially when they've seen how bad kind of standard dubbing is, it's an absolute solution to maintain the performance. Because we don't like one of the things we do actually from a science point of view is we disentangle the performance and the synchronicity as two separate items. So we don't touch the actual performance. Do you know what I mean? Unless it's like as part of the synchronicity translation piece. It's very important to kind of preserve the authentic performance from the start, and you're only kind of essentially doing small kind of mouth readjustments to fit the synchronicity of foreign dialogue. So yeah, you want to be. I think that the rule we tend to abide by is just to be hands off, and let the kind of learning do its work to bridge those gaps, and let the actor's kind of performance be the main core of everything, really.
Well, it is fascinating to hear about it, and it absolutely seems to now be a new tool in the arsenal of filmmakers, but also studios. So I look
Mm.
forward to hearing about the next one. Although I was going to say, Scott, one of the
Yeah.
interesting things is, wouldn't it be interesting if someone went into the film not knowing this, that this was used, and they
Yeah.
don't even notice it at all, which is, of course,
Oh,
the absolute intention.
that's 100%. You're
Yeah.
100% right, because that is really what the you know what uh, and I think for a large majority of audience, that's exactly what happens, right? You don't,
Mm,
and it's like anything in a film, right? It's like if anything pulls you out of a film, if anything that pulls you out of the immersion of a movie, it's kind of failed. So it shouldn't be doing that. And I think, yeah, I think that yeah, you should the best audience, and we have a lot of debate about this with people we're working with. Um, in a way, yeah, you don't want to be alerting people to these things, just like you don't want to be, you don't want to be alerting them that a special effect is coming up, because it pulls you out in the same
mm.
way, in a more broad way of like just seeing a film and believing that it was originally in English, but actually it might have been in Korean, but you didn't even know that is the way to enjoy it, and to enjoy it without thinking about it. So I think that is absolutely the case. I think, and but as someone, industry side though, it's always very interesting, isn't it? Because there's that it's very exciting, this kind of new wave of tools for the filming process and for the creative process is I think it's very exciting for our industry as a whole. So I think like my view is that it's going to completely change the film industry and how we make films. And I know that like for my next film, I will shoot the film differently, knowing what the technology is now available.
Mm.
And I think as that gets more widely adopted, it'll lead to better films and a wider audience overall. And we'll start, ultimately, I think what we'll do with translations, we'll end up making global films, which we are long overdue to do as a world, really, and as a filmmaking community. So I think it has huge benefits in the long term that can really kind of yeah, really help our industry and everything that it affects.
I totally agree, and can't wait to see and hear what you're doing next. Thanks so much for chatting to me, Scott. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you. Thanks very much. Great talking.